Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Makwariola. It has been an eventful year so far across Africa, with economic realities often shaping evening discussions between families at a dinner table and friends chatting over a few bottles of beer down the street. Today, the system designed to meet the global food demand and supply is struggling, ensuring that poverty as a disease rarely discriminates between the good, the bad, and the hungry. And so we ask, what are your thoughts on the level of poverty in Africa and the political will on the part of government to tackle the menace? You can join the conversation and share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC News NG. We take a report now, and Africa Today will continue. Welcome on board.
The United Nations Food and Agriculture Program (FAO) says about 821 million people go hungry every year. And the world's topmost food security outfit, the World Food Programme, has described Nigeria as a food deficit country, a description that no doubt calls for an assessment of what the problems are. A large number of Nigerians and the country's farmers live in the rural areas where there is a shortage of food storage facilities. This leads to a huge waste of farm produce. Watchers of the agriculture sector like Mary Alimi, a radio presenter and an agriculture enthusiast, told me the challenges go far deeper. She said a major bottleneck creating artificial food scarcity is the handiwork of middlemen who buy farm produce from farmers at very cheap rates, hoard them to create artificial food scarcity, then later sell to the traders in the open market at higher prices, leaving them with no option than to sell at higher prices too. And when people can't afford the consumables, they start to get rotten, like these tomatoes and pepper, which the traders now sell to anyone willing to buy at a loss.
Hoarding food is also something that doesn't make sense, but it's done for profit. Where you sell 4 pieces of tomatoes, for example, for say 200 naira, reducing the profit margin, when you could have sold 10 pieces for the same amount and still make your profits. But because you want to give that sense of scarcity, so people are forced to buy it at that price that you offer it. And then at the end of the day, you end up wasting a whole lot of the food. That's a big problem.
The traders and the buyers were open about their perception of the spiraling effect of the situation.
When we bring out our wares, no one buys them from us. When we tell them the prices, they run away.
The prices, I discovered that they keep going up every day. You come today, the price is different from what you bought. Nigerians cannot eat 3 square meals a day the way it used to be before.
Internal armed conflicts and hunger go side by side. That has been more of Nigeria's major problem since 2014, leaving thousands of children traumatized and malnourished.
Welcome back. Before we get into the discussion of the day, let's update you on some of the top news stories around Africa. 5 journalists at a newspaper in the Democratic Republic of Congo were abducted on Friday after the publication of articles on the misappropriation of rations of police cadets. Police in Tanzania say kidnapped billionaire Mohamed Dewji was taken by men driving a car that had arrived from a neighboring country. Police Inspector General Simon Siro declined to say which country the car came from, not wanting to cause a diplomatic row. Libya's foreign minister says his country opposes a European Union plan to set up assessment centers for migrants outside the EU's territory. The plan was drawn up by EU leaders last June as Italy called for more controls on migration flows. Now joining me to look at the level of poverty in Africa and the political will on the part of government to tackle the menace is Daniel Akilami, political analyst, a social commentator, and a 2-time presidential aspirant in Nigeria. And on Skype, I have Dr. Sylvester Odion, Associate Professor, Political Science Department, Lagos State University. Good to have you gentlemen on the program tonight.
Thank you for having me.
So let me begin with Dr.
Thank
Sylvester. Absolutely great to have you as well. Let's begin with you now, Dr. Sylvester. What would you say is behind the high poverty rates in Africa?
I think that on the surface, we want to say that it is bad leadership and the inability, of course, to mobilize our resources in ways that they can be meaningful, to our people. But I think that we can't understand the context of poverty today without looking, of course, at the historical background of the continent. That's what primary uneven development. That was occasioned, of course, by the sheer fact of slavery and unequal exchange that took place, before former colonization and, of course, during colonization. That was there. And most of the policies that we have mainstreamed after colonization are what we also call policies of secondary uneven development. Those policies reinforce, of course, the primary uneven development that was occasioned by slavery and unequal exchange that took place during the mercantile, era of relationship between us and the Europeans.
Right.
Having said that,
okay,
what has happened is that you have a crop of leadership that have not been able to, of course, see through some of these dynamics, at the end, of course, start an autonomous, economic policy to ensure that our people are free from poverty and mercenarization, which they have found themselves today.
Right. So, Daniel, do you share the same sentiment, or you have a different view about this?
Well, I think from that angle of the bad leadership, I agree with him. And I just want to emphasize the fact that at the center of this poverty rate in Africa
right.
is the issue of bad leadership and corruption. There are so many other factors that have contributed to the poverty rate, but corruption stands out. And this is not very difficult to see. You can see that many countries in Africa have so many resources that they shouldn't be at the level where they are at the moment. But because we've not been able to get leaders that are selfless, that are committed to equitable distribution of resources, that could alleviate the suffering and the poverty in the land, then we continue to have this percentage of people living below the poverty line in the continent. Now, it's so sad to the extent that the bulk of these stolen resources are not even invested in the continent. They are taken outside to the West. Many of these supposed leaders that have the fate of the continent in their hand do not have the vision, the dream, and the love to transform their countries. So they carry all these resources outside to go and invest in the West, to buy properties, and to hide, especially from the law enforcement agency. But at the end, this is what the situation leads us with. The poverty rate keeps increasing in the continent. And you look at it too, beyond the corruption as well, the factor of the persistent war and conflict in the continent is also contributing to the level of poverty. See the unrest in the Central Africa, even Nigeria here, the northern part of Nigeria, the northeast. So many families have been separated. People abandon their homes, their farm. They have to relocate. So those are the factors. So until we're able to get good leadership in Africa, we will continue to struggle in reducing the poverty rate.
All right, let's just quickly go on a very quick break. Now you're watching Africa Today, and we're looking at the level of poverty in Africa and the political will on the part of government to tackle the menace. We'll have more in just a moment. Stay with us. Global rates of extreme poverty are said to have dramatically declined in the last few decades, falling from 1.9 billion in 1990 to approximately 736 million today. Well, latest statistics also show that more than 400 million people in Africa are currently extreme poor, more than half of the world's total, with some now calling Nigeria the poverty capital of the world ahead of India. Now, Dr. Odion, I believe now you join me via phone. So with this perception that Nigeria is, the leading capital ahead of India in terms of poverty level, would you say the government hasn't done enough? Although you've pointed out rightly from the beginning, what steps do you think the government is lacking, aside from leadership? Is it just the government or the government and the people?
I think essentially the government has to be blamed. The reason is that the government has not been able, of course, to understand the historical constraints. When you understand the historical constraints that led the continent to where it is today, that is only when you can chart policies, to overturn those constraints. And it appears that they don't have that capacity. And what they have leaned on is what I've always called the over-aching externality, of the continent's problem. They are believing in receive policy from outside, that it will solve their problems. Recall when Christine Lagarde came to Nigeria at the early days of this regime, when it was newly inaugurated. It was Lagarde that suggested this bank charges that you are seeing now, and they even suggested then that they should increase, value-added tax and all of that. A number of a cocktail of policies to be implemented was given to this government. That shows that the policies are not, homegrown. They are not things that we articulated based on the objective conditions of our society. If you look at the resource map of Nigeria, you will discover that even the 36 states, including the Federal Capital Territory, there is no state that does not have, a number of mineral resources that can be exploited, of course, and turned into intermediate and, of course, capital goods in the country in ways that you can generate resources. But you can see that nobody is doing that. And it is characteristics of the nature of the Nigerian, state, what we normally refer to as a rentier state. We have one major resources that brings in, foreign exchange for the country. That's the hydrocarbon. And that is the only, signature that Nigeria has in the global economy. And all state elites in Nigeria are relying on it. Even the private sector have not been able to generate what I call independent capital. They rely on the same resources from the state to build the private sector. So you can see the kind of dilemma we are in. So you need a government that understands this historical constraint, that is able to negotiate, the international, cycle in ways that you can unleash development dynamics in the country without being constrained by those, historical forces.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Dr. Odion. But in a case where the government is tied in terms of not providing the necessary facilities or resources to harness the potentials of the people, isn't it better for it to partner with the private sector? We talk about public-private partnership, for instance, so that we can at least help ourselves as a country or as people, so we do not have to depend totally on foreign aid, as it were.
Let me make a point. When people talk about a public-private sector, I just laugh. And when you also say that private sector should lead development, I laugh. When you travel across the continent, the level of poverty and underdevelopment, is so huge and amazing that I ask myself, if the state is the custodian of much of the resources in the continent, how do you expect the private sector to lead development? So in the context of the continent, the state in Africa must play a leading role. There's no two ways about that. But I think the problem here is that you have elites, who are in charge of the political institutions, who do not understand what to do. And they rely on the elite from the metropolitan states, to chart policies here. That is basically the problem. Now, do you need people to tell you that you need to provide infrastructure? Look at Nigeria, for instance, from Ondo up to Kogi, it's a bitumen bed. But the roads in Nigeria are unpassable. So how do you explain that? So these are things that you expect that a leadership should be able to navigate.
Right.
You know why this external angle is important? In Ghana, when Ghana was, implementing adjustment policy under Rawlings, you know what the Ghanaian people were doing? When the IMF team and the World Bank are coming to Ghana, they will move all the resources from other private sectors and the rest of them and put it in the government account in ways that when they come, they will see that Ghana has huge, deposits. And they begin to talk about Ghana, as, improving and doing a lot of things. Right. So they were giving Ghana more of the loan, external loans that it needed at that time to implement these policies.
All right, point taken now, Dr. Odion. Let me quickly come to Dr. Mr. Kilami with me in the studio. Now, looking at this situation from his point of analysis, what would you say, what countries would you say have made, great progress in reducing poverty?
Well, if you look at Africa, it's very hard to see most of the leading countries economically, like Nigeria and South Africa, are doing enough. But there are two countries that are standing out now. That's Rwanda and Ethiopia. And if the rest of the continent can really pay attention to what is happening in Rwanda and also look at what's happening in Ethiopia now, I think we should be able to learn some basic things on how we can begin to reduce the poverty level in the different countries. But the problem with Africa is such that it's self-inflicted. This is a continent with a very rich soil, resources, that should make the continent to be one of the richest. But mismanagement of these resources and the fact that the leaders are now waiting for aids from the West, support from the West, leaving what's supposed to be done undone. So it's the big problem. So until we begin to have leaders that have the love of their people, the vision to lift the people up, to change their status, we may not be able to see a difference. But as it's going now, we need to focus on building institutions in Africa. Before we can say we can begin to come out of this poverty level, the institutions must begin to function. Until we have vibrant, strong institutions that can check the political leadership, put them under control, enforce policies that will allow the people down the line to benefit from government policies. And don't forget also that most of the aids that are coming from the West are also being looted by government officials. They are not getting to the grassroots. Especially funds that should help SME, funds that should support agricultural policies, help the rural areas. They are not getting to the people. And at the end, the government will still come and tax these people, increase tariffs on several services. Yes, and at the end,
we get all these points, but the major thing now is how do we ensure this practice is nipped in the bud, where we do not have a government that pays lip service to its duties in terms of providing infrastructures for the people and ensure that they live above poverty line, because we can sit here and talk about all this all day, but another thing is implementation. What should be those key areas in terms of action to ensure that the government does what it needs to do to provide the necessities for the people?
As it is now, we need the new orientation in leadership. It all boils down to the leadership. If we begin to have responsible leaders in the continent, look at what is happening in Rwanda, for example. An individual initiated the revolution that's turned the country around after a bloody civil war. So we need more responsible leaders that have vision, visionary leaders, people who can see into the future and lift their people up. Look at China, for example. Within 25 to 30 years, millions of people were lifted out of poverty. When Nigeria got independence, what was the level of China then? Then see the years, as the years roll by, these countries were growing. Malaysia, Singapore, they were all growing.
So what should
they
be
were
the action
lifting their
plan?
people. Now, the action plan should be, we must begin in Africa to demand for transparent leadership, accountable leadership. And that we must work to see that we build our institutions, the institutions that can check the abuse and the corruption that is going on.
Such as?
Well, for example, we need to build more of financial institutions like EFCC that can checkmate resources and how they are being dispensed.
Right.
And beyond that too, we need to have leadership that can bring to the table equitable distribution of resources. That every citizen will have a way to benefit from the national resources.
Right.
And also, we need to have a new orientation in Africa.
Absolutely. Now, in closing thoughts now, Dr. Odion, oh dear, it seems we have lost connection with him there. Well, as soon as we have him back online, we will have his closing thoughts on this issue. From your own position now, how do you view the long-term, what's your position of the long-term outlook for Africa?
Well, for the long time,
In eradicating poverty.
Eradicating poverty,
yeah.
we need action. Action from the leaders in Africa, not from the West. We are the ones that can pull ourselves out. If we put our acts together, no amount of fund and aid coming from the West can lift Africa out of poverty. Absolutely. So we need action. We need to take action. There are many policies, every year when this United Nations Special Day for Eradication of Poverty comes up, there are speeches here and there, an announcement and policies, but bulk of these speeches are never implemented. Okay. So our leaders should need to get to action.
All right.
We should be driven by social policies.
Okay, now I understand we have Dr. Odion back online. Dr. Odion, now in eradicating poverty, oh dear, it seems we're having some challenges with our network this hour. You are about completing your sentence on your thoughts.
So at this point, we should be driven by social policies that can touch the lives of the people in Africa.
Right.
And the leaders need to take action. They need to work on areas and infrastructure that will make life much easier. Even if you are talking about agriculture now, many of these countries, they cannot even boast of infrastructure to fast track a modern day agricultural process. So a lot is wrong. Beyond corruption,
So it's both on the part of the government and the people in this case to work together to ensure that we get out of this pit hole called poverty, or whatever it is being termed as. But I do hope we have Dr. Sylvester Odion. Dr. Sylvester, your closing thoughts on this issue. Okay, indeed, I've just been told that we seem to have lost connection with Dr. Sylvester on this matter. But even though on this issue, even though we made some sense out of this discussion, we would definitely like to thank Dr. Sylvester Odion, Associate Professor, Political Science Department, Lagos State University. And I'd also like to thank my guests in the studio, Daniel Akinlami, political analyst, social commentator, and two-time presidential aspirant in Nigeria. Appreciate your thoughts on Africa today. Well, often regarded as a continent so rich yet so poor, Africa tells an unfolding story of a region where abundant resources falls short on inspiring efficient resourcefulness. To tackle poverty, solutions would have to be homegrown with equal opportunities to thrive as a continent, prosper as a nation, and succeed as individuals. And that is our package for tonight. But don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC News NG, and also follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one, again, I am Esther Makwariola, and always remember, Africa can only get better.